Hello there, fellow cultists. This is DM Nell, and I'm back with another episode of Shadow Talk. In this episode, we continue, we being me, my deep dive into the core rulebook for Shadow the Demon Lord. We're on Chapter 2, and I'm picking up today's discussion in the section that starts with Afflictions. So, Afflictions are very, very, very similar to what's referred to as conditions in Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because these are very similar and have similar effects as conditions do in D&D. So, assuming you're coming from another role-playing game, this shouldn't be a new concept to you. So afflictions, essentially happen to you when something is imposing an affliction on you, such as a spell or something that happens during the course of play. And afflictions typically are not good for you. They impose some sort of limitation, and you generally want to get rid of afflictions as quickly as possible. However, some afflictions just happen as a course of being a sentient living person, and one of those is a sleep. So everybody needs to sleep, unless you're, of course, a clockwork. So when you are sleeping, you have the asleep affliction. Now, this is important when you're adventuring and you are taking a rest, because if you're asleep, then it limits your capabilities. A sleeping creature is prone and unconscious. Another creature that can reach it can use an action to wake it up, unless otherwise noted. Taking damage removes this affliction. I would also include in here that a sleeping creature could potentially be awakened by loud noises, which is kind of difficult to adjudicate because a sleeping creature is prone and unconscious. And as you see later, an unconscious creature fails all of its challenge rolls. So making a perception challenge roll would fail. But I would say I would make an exception actually, and I would say that an unconscious creature fails everything except a perception challenge roll, but it might have a one or more banes because the creature is asleep. That's a lot to add here, so I'm not surprised that it's not included in here, but that's essentially how I would handle the asleep affliction. If there is a chance that somebody might be awakened because of a loud noise, and it would have to be a loud noise. It couldn't just be, somebody hearing a floorboard creaking or something like that. Although my wife would be awakened by that sound. But then she's got like superhuman hearing. All right, so anyway, that's the asleep affliction. Blinded is pretty much what you would expect. It treats its surroundings as totally obscured. Now we'll talk about obscurement later on in the chapter. So other creatures make attack rolls against a blinded creature with a boon. And those are attacks against a blinded creature's defense or agility. And then the blinded creature's speed becomes 2. Of course, unless its normal speed is slower. All right, charmed. The main takeaway here is that the charmed creature cannot choose the creature that bestowed the affliction as the target of its attacks, which makes sense. Compelled. Compelled basically means that you are being controlled by another creature. So if you're in combat, the creature that compelled you can force the compelled creature during the fast turn of the combat, and we'll talk about fast turns and slow turns later in the chapter, to take an action or to move up to its speed. So a compelled creature can only do one thing in a round. They can either move or it can take an action, and the creature that's compelling the PC or the NPC or the monster decides what that is going to be. It decides the action or decides the movement. So that's what compelled is. Daze basically takes you out of the picture altogether. You can't use any actions. Deafened, perception rolls made to listen automatically result in failure. Defenseless. Basically, a defenseless person cannot defend itself. Its defense is 5, can't use actions. Its challenge rolls automatically fail. However, a defenseless creature can still perceive its surroundings and can make perception challenge rolls normally. All right, now some of these afflictions should be combined into one kind of overarching category of things that give you 1 bane on attack rolls and challenge rolls. So that would include diseased. That would include fatigued. That would include impaired and poisoned. All 4 of those have the same affliction effect on the creature. Frightened. So if you have been frightened by a creature, then you make attack rolls and challenge rolls with 1 bane, unless the creature is within sight. The creature that caused you to be frightened, if it's within sight of you, then you get 3 banes. So that's not cool. The grabbed affliction basically means if you're the same size as the creature that's grabbed, then you can't move. Same size or smaller. If the creature you grabbed is larger than you, then it can still move, and you can choose to move with it, or you can choose to let go of the grab. Immobilize. A creature that is immobilized has a speed of 0 and cannot benefit from speed bonuses. Other creatures make all attack rolls against the immobilized creature with 1 boon. That's probably worthy of highlighting. All right, I already touched on impaired and poisoned. A prone creature lies on the ground. Obviously, creatures can move through its space. While prone, the creature can move by crawling or can use its move to stand up. And this is important here. Or can use its move to stand up. This comes up a lot, and it's pretty harsh. What that one little statement there is stating. I'm a word master here. What that is stating there is that you have to use your entire movement, if you are prone, to stand up. That sucks. That makes being prone sucks, because the only thing you can do on your turn when you are in a combat encounter, if you start off a round and you're prone, the only move you can do is to stand up. Now, I kind of house ruled this because I think that's kind of harsh. I say that they can use half their movement to stand up, and that leaves them with still half their movement. But that's a house rule that I use simply because I think this is pretty harsh. All right, slowed. A slowed creature can only take a slow turn. That's pretty important. Its speed is halved, and it can't benefit from increases to speed. Stunned. Stunned creature cannot move or use actions. Being stunned sucks. Creature automatically gets a failure in any challenge rolls it would make. Other creatures make all attack rolls against a stunned creature with 1 boon. Being stunned sucks. This is a shitty affliction. I try to minimize that as much as possible on creatures that I use. Stunning a monster, I don't love it, especially if it's like my big bad evil guy. But it really sucks if you're a player character, because that kind of takes you out of the game. You can't do anything. You're just waiting for the affliction to end, which sucks. Now, the good thing is, typically when you get something like this, you can make a challenge roll at the end of each round to shake it off, usually. Otherwise, it'll tell you you're stunned until the end of your next round, or you're stunned for a round, which really sucks, because depending on, where you're at in the combat round, and we'll probably talk about this later, but whenever you get something in the game that says that you are affected for a round, what that means is that you're in the current round of combat, or an encounter, a round for an encounter. And for the remainder of that round, you're affected by this affliction. And then for the entirety of the next round, you are affected by the affliction. And at the end of that next round, that affliction no longer affects you. So that sucks. But again, I understand why it is like that, because you could have, monsters usually go last in a combat encounter, and we'll get to that. And so you could have been stunned by a monster. The monster goes last in the round, and then a new round starts, which means, if it didn't last that whole round, then it means that you would essentially get away with not being stunned. So I understand the rule, but it really sucks, especially if you get the stunned affliction or similar affliction that lasts a round, early in the combat round, and then you have the rest of that round, and then the entirety of the next round before that affliction wears off. But again, that is for things that specify that the affliction lasts for a round, or that you can make a challenge roll to shake it off at the end of each round, which is a little bit different, because that means at the end of each round you can make a challenge roll to shake it off. I know I'm rambling here, but it'll make sense. We'll talk about this more later. Okay, so let's see, where was I? That was stunned. Surprised. Again, another surprise creature can't use any actions, can't move, and automatically gets a failure on any challenge rolls it would make. So basically, this helps. I know some games have a surprise round, which means that one side is surprised and the other side can act freely. This actually localizes the surprise effect to only those creatures that fail their perception challenge roll against the attacking creatures. So let's say you're in a your characters are being ambushed. So your characters are walking down the road. Your GM or your DM has each of them make a perception challenge roll. Let's say half of them make it, half of them don't. So the half that don't make it are surprised. They can't do anything that first round. But the ones that do make it are not surprised, and they can react to what's going on in that first round. Now, what they can't do is to alert the other people that are surprised, so that they're no longer surprised. You can't do that. The people that are surprised, that's it. They're surprised for that first round. Can't do anything. The people that are not surprised, they can act normally. Then you have the unconscious affliction. So every once in a while you'll drop unconscious, which really sucks because, again, you can't do anything. You can't move. You can't act. You can't perceive your surroundings. Your defense is 5. You can't take actions. You can't move. And your challenge rolls result in failure. All right. Sometimes you're hit with multiple afflictions. If that's the case, you must remove each instance of the affliction to end its effect on you. So that gives an example here. If you're bitten by a poisonous snake and you have the poisoned affliction, then you're bitten by a venomous spider and you get the poisoned affliction from that, you have to remove each of those independently in order to no longer be poisoned. All right, so that ends the affliction section. Now we got a little weird sidebar down here. It talks about sentient objects, and basically it just says sentient objects such as animated beings are effectively creatures and are subject to the rules governing creatures. Such objects might have intellect and will scores, the perception characteristic, and other capabilities. So you really just kind of treat them as creatures. Not sure why it's on this page, but I guess they could be. I guess it's saying that they could be affected by afflictions as well. All right. What else we got? So that completes the section on afflictions. So now we're in the environment. So the environment is, a lot of times it's kind of ignored in combat encounters, which is a shame because, interact with you can incorporate your environment to make an encounter more immersive, and I definitely recommend that you do so. This kind of just gives you details on how you can treat and interact with the environment. So the environment is typically filled with objects. These are like doors, curtains, statues, staircases, and even dead characters. Objects can be damaged and destroyed. Objects have attributes, some attributes, but they don't have other attributes. So for example, objects have a strength of 0 and agility of 0. So that means that they have those attributes, but they do not have intellect or will scores, and thus are immune to attack rolls against those two attributes and any effects that would allow challenge rolls using those attributes. So because objects actually have a strength, now the strength is 0 and the agility is 0, that means that attacks that target strength and attacks that target agility can still affect the creature, but attacks that target an object's will or intellect score automatically fails, because if you actually do not have an attribute, like it says here, it does objects do not have intellect or will scores. If you do not, in other words, in the stat block, it would have a little dash indicating that it does not have that attribute. Then it's immune to any type of attack that would target that attribute. Objects typically don't have perception. Objects have a defensive 5 normally. Objects have size just as creatures do, and objects are generally incapable of moving under their own power and have a speed of 0. Obviously, there are some exceptions, wheels, or things that have wheels, or round objects once they're set into motion, that sort of thing. Obviously, they do move, but just typical objects that are immobile and are unable to move under their own power have a speed of 0. All right, so objects' health and damage depends on its size and composition. So its base health is equal to 10 times its size. So a size 1 object has 10 health normally. Now, it also depends on what that thing is made of. If that is a size 1 statue made of paper, an origami statue, then the objects made from fragile materials have half the base health. So that size 1 origami statue would have 5 health, whereas a size 1 statue made out of marble might have much more health. So it states here, objects made from stone or metal multiply their health by 2 or more. So you could say, a granite statue would have 3 times the normal health, so it would have 30 health, or something along those lines. Okay, so damage to objects basically manifests as cracks, chunks falling off, scorch marks, scratches, that sort of thing. Let's see here. Let's give an example. For example, a galleon is immune to damage from a dagger. Let's talk about that. Okay, so damage shows an object, blah, 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 blah. Some objects are resistant or immune to some sources of damage based on their size and position. For example, a galleon is immune to damage from a dagger, and a sword is not likely to be harmed by cold or ice. So you kind of have to, your GM kind of has to adjudicate that using common sense, really. It doesn't matter how many times you stab a galleon with a dagger, it's not going to hurt the galleon. Alrighty, unless of course the dagger is wielded by a storm giant, or something along those lines. Actually, there are no storm giants in this game, so. Okay, so carried and worn objects. So if you have an object that you're carrying or is worn, or some other creature is carrying or wearing an object, they're not generally at risk of taking damage from attacks unless those objects are specifically targeted. And it doesn't state this here, but it should. If an object is being carried or worn, it typically has the same defense value as the creature that is carrying it or wearing it. So there's that. That's my rule. I don't know if that's the official rule here, but that's my rule, and I'm sticking to it. Breaking objects. Rather than dealing damage to chop up or smash an object, you might just use brute force to break it. Examples include kicking down a door, putting your fist through a pane of glass, and bursting rope bonds. When you attempt to break an object, make a strength challenge roll. For each point of size the object is larger than you, make the roll with 1 bane. Depending on the object's composition, additional banes or boons might apply to the roll. So that's a good thing to highlight as well. All right, range and distance. This comes up a lot, so this is a section you might want to bookmark in your core rulebook because it does come up frequently. A few broad categories describe the range of weapons and spells for the purposes of choosing targets and centering area effects. If the target is you, then you are the target, or the effect originates from you or at a point within your space. You are always within range of yourself for purposes of targeting. If the range is reach, then the target or the point from which the effect originates must be within your reach, and you must be able to touch it. So we talked about reach before. Your reach equals to your size. So if you're size 1, you have a reach of 1. If you're size 2, you have a reach of 2. And that would be in yards. So a size 1 creature has a reach of 1 yard. So that is, if you're on a grid, then you're the square in the middle, and every square directly adjacent to your square is 1 yard away from you. Therefore, you have a reach of 1. You can reach any one of those squares around you. A reach of 2 means that you can reach out 2 squares out from you, and so on. Okay, if you attempt to touch an unwilling creature, you must make a strength or agility attack roll against the target's agility. On a success, you touch the target. If the range is short, then the target or the point from which the effect originates must be within 5 yards of you. So within 5 yards is important. So that means that short range is anything from you out to 5 yards. So the outside limit is 5 yards. Medium range means that the target or the point from which the effect originates must be within 20 yards of you. So that means that a thing is considered to be within medium range out to 20 yards. 20 yards is the outermost distance from you to be considered within medium range. Long range means that the target or the point from which the effect originates must be within 100 yards of you. So the outside distance from you to be considered long range is 100 yards. So anything beyond 100 yards is no longer long range. It goes to the next category, extreme. The target or the point from which the effect originates must be within 500 yards of you. So going out to 500 yards, if it's within 500 yards, then it is considered extreme. Anything beyond 500 yards would be considered not targetable or dependent on sight. You must be able to see the target or the point from which the effect originates. So those are the classifications, those are the categories. So from 0 to 5 yards, that's short range. From 5 yards to 20 yards, that's medium range. From 6 yards to 20 yards is medium range. From 21 yards to 100 yards is long range. And from 101 yards out to 500 yards is extreme range. Anything beyond that, you have to be able to see it in order to be able to target it. Okay. And even if you can see it, it would still probably be considered not targetable. Because really, the outside here is saying you can target something that's within 500 yards. If it's beyond that, it's probably up to the DM to determine whether you can target it or not. Doesn't state that here, but that's how I would handle it anyway. So sight means if the range is sight, so sometimes a spell states that you have to be able to see a target. Then if that's the case, then you must be able to see the target or the point from which the effect originates. So pretty simple. All right, so that is range and distance. Again, this is used a lot. So bookmark this page. Obscurement, poor lighting, precipitation, and fog reduce visibility. An area and creatures and objects within that area can be partially, heavily, or totally obscured. So 3 categories there, actually 4, which would be unobscured. But if you're unobscured, then you're not affected by obscurement. If you're partially obscured, that would include things such as rain, light snow, fog, and shadows. So if you are ducked in the corner of a shadowy alleyway, then you're considered partially obscured. You can still be targeted, but the shadow kind of helps to keep you obscured. So anyway, we'll talk about the effects of obscurement a little bit later on, but you first have to determine if your character is unobscured, partially obscured, heavily obscured, which means that they're in an area that is affected by heavy rain, snow, and when it says snow and light snow, that means it's snowfall. It's something that has to be affecting the visual, the ability of sight-based creatures to see into an area. So that would mean light snowfall or heavy snowfall, heavy rain, snow, and thick fog, all heavily obscure an area. Everything in such areas is faintly visible. So you can still be targeted, but you are considered heavily obscured, and there are impacts to that. Any roll involving sight by a creature looking into a heavily obscured area is made with 2 banes. So, I didn't do that for partially obscured. So, any roll involving sight by a creature looking into a partially obscured area is made with 1 bane. So we will highlight that. And heavily obscured, any roll involving sight by a creature looking into a heavily obscured area is made with 2 banes. And the key word there is looking. So if you are targeting a creature using your sight, then that would affect you. However, some creatures target creatures not based on sight, but based on other senses. So obscurement would not necessarily affect a creature that is not sight-based. Then totally obscured. Creatures and objects in totally obscured areas cannot be seen because they are in darkness or blinding conditions such as a whiteout in a blizzard. A creature that is in an area that is totally obscured is blinded. So this is talking about a creature that is in an area that's totally obscured. A creature that is in that area is blinded. This top part here means that you can't target a creature that's totally obscured. Unless, of course, you have an ability that allows you to. But if you are a creature that's actually in that obscurement, then you can't see. You're blinded. All right, so that is obscurement. Obscurement can get a little bit confusing, so reading through that several times and referring back to this is very helpful. All right, then you have illuminations. The game uses 3 levels of illumination, and I would argue that there should be 4 levels of illumination. So you have the lit level of illumination. That is normal light that is considered light that you can see normally in. So the sun, the moon, torches, candles, and other forms of illumination cause areas to become lit. A sighted creature can see everything in an lit area that's within its field of view and is not hidden. Darkness becomes shadows within a distance of the light source equal to twice the light's radius. So if you have a light radius of 10 feet, then twice that is 20 feet. So anything from the edge of the light out to 20 feet is considered shadows. And then darkness beyond that. Shadows. Shadows form... Actually, I'm going to highlight that. All right, shadows form the border between light and darkness. Indirect illumination, faint glows, and moonlight create areas of shadow. An area of shadow is partially obscured. Highlight that. And then you have darkness. This is the total absence of light. An area of darkness is totally obscured. And then I would say the fourth category here should be bright light. So bright light should be the same as darkness. This is the overabundance of light. An area of bright light is also totally obscured. So if you got you can say bright light, you can say blinding light. But if you have blinding light, again, that's something things that are in blinding light are obscured. You can't see if the light is so overwhelming that you literally can't see anything in an area of blinding light. Okay. Invisibility. And okay, back up. Some people are going to say, well, yeah, you can if you block out the source of the light. Well, yeah. If you can block out the source of the light. But then if you have something between you and directly between you and the source of the light, or the source of the light is directly above, then that would be problematic. So again, I would still say that there's room for bright light being part of the whole illumination equation. But that's just me. All right, so invisibility. An invisible creature or object cannot be seen by other creatures using normal senses. It is considered to be totally obscured and thus can hide anywhere. An invisible creature makes attack rolls with one boon against the defense or agility of a target creature that cannot see it. I'll highlight that. An invisible creature still makes noise, leaves footprints, and displaces liquids. Clouds of dust and smoke can also reveal such creatures. In such conditions, the invisible creature is treated as if it were in a heavily obscured area. So it's still harder to hit, but it's not completely invisible, thus it's not totally obscured and can be targeted. But if it's totally obscured, can't be targeted. So those are a couple of good things to highlight there, just like I did. All right. So that concludes the section on the environment. Now we get into role-playing. So again, I'm assuming that you're coming from other role-playing games and you know how to role-play. So I'm going to kind of glaze over this. So it talks about making decisions. It talks about your character's background and, using that as a basis to determine how you would react, your personality, connections with other players, and here's a section on creating character bonds. The characters making up your group have relationships with one another. Your character might be friendly to some and antagonistic to others. Identifying how your character feels about the other members of your group gives you cues on how to play your character when interacting with your companions. when your character joins the group, you can choose 2 other characters in the group. You have a positive bond with one and a negative bond with the other. You have a neutral bond towards everyone else in the group. You can share your connections with other players or keep them secret as you choose. You must, however, reveal your connections to the game master. So if you have a positive bond, that means it's reflecting feelings of admiration, friendship, trust, possibly love. When you roll a 1 on a boon gained from the character, you can choose the character you choose for your positive bond. You can re-roll the boon. So that would be that would be a nice thing. But the adverse of that, of course, is a negative bond indicates that your character has strong feelings of antipathy, jealousy, disdain, or distrust. When you roll a 6 on a boon you gained from the creature, you have to re-roll the boon and use the second roll. I don't use character bonds. If you really want to get into that, if you're heavy into role playing and you really want to do that, yeah, it's there. It's an interesting concept. I'm not dissing it. I would never remember. That's the thing. This just puts too much detail on the dungeon master, and the characters may remember, so they might bring it up, but I think even they might forget. So again, you may want to include it. It's totally up to you, but that's why it's optional. But it's there anyway. Neutral bond indicates no strong feelings one way or the other. You can be friendly towards a character with whom you have a neutral bond, or you can argue and bicker. Whether you lean towards that character in positive or negative direction, your opinion about that character is not strong enough to alter your interactions with the character. You can change bonds as a result of whatever happens, or when you increase your level. Any change in bond should reflect the developments in the story. And then it talks about story development, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Fortune. I am going to talk about Fortune because Fortune is a really cool mechanic in Shadow of the Demon Lord. It is similar to Inspiration in D&D, but much better in my opinion. So the Game Master awards Fortune for exceptional role-playing. I don't do that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. If you have a good idea and share it with the group, if your character pulls off some remarkable stunt, or if you do something else that makes the game more fun to play. Once you gain Fortune, expending it represents a dash of good luck when you need it. While you have Fortune, you can expend it in one of the following ways. You can use your Fortune when the result of a d20 roll is a failure to make that failure automatically into a success. This right here, ladies and germs, is very powerful. So when you really have that roll that really needs to hit, the deciding factor, then you can use your Fortune point to turn that failure into a success if you failed initially. You could also use your Fortune point instead to use it on another player when they roll a d20, and you by expending your Fortune, then that player gains 2 boons to their roll. So you got another player character that is really needs to make this roll. So you're going to expend your Fortune to grant them 2 boons to their roll. And then the last bullet point here, when any player, including you, rolls a d6, you can expend a Fortune point to replace the number on a die with a 6. So this last bullet point here comes in handy when you are dying or when you are incapacitated and you're making fate rolls, so that you can get quickly back into the action. So if you are dropped by a monster and you are incapacitated and disabled and you're starting to make your fate rolls, you have to roll a 6 in order to gain 1 health back and get back in the game. So you can then use your Fortune point to make that happen automatically. Of course, you would roll your fate roll first, and you could roll a 6. But if you don't roll a 6, then you can say, I'm going to use my fate point and make that automatically become a 6, in which case you get back in the game. So we talked about death in the last video. You might want to go back and watch that again to refresh, or just read it in the book. All right, once you expend it, you do not have fortune until the GM awards it to you again. All right, so that is the rule as written. I don't use it rules as written. I find that role-playing awards typically lean more in favor of those player characters that like role-playing and that are good at role-playing, get into character, are more flamboyant. Those are the obvious ways that you can award fortune, which unfortunately, if you've got other players that are more introverted, they talk about their character in the third person, they're less likely to speak out when they have a good idea. These are the these are the players that are going to be negatively impacted by any rule that requires or that provides a reward for exceptional role playing. Because, who determines exceptional role playing? Well, the DM does, of course. But I find that is a little bit too subjective. And I need something a little bit more objective so that it is equalized amongst my players. And you could argue that fortune shouldn't be equalized. Fortune is an additive. It's pretty powerful. You only give it to those people that earn it. You could argue that, but I don't want to go there. If it's part of the game, and this is part of the game, this is a core rule. It doesn't say it's optional. Then I want everybody to have fortune at some point. So my home rule, my house rule, is that I award fortune whenever a character levels up. Or whenever the group levels up, I should say, because characters don't level up, the group levels up. So whenever the group levels up, every character has a fortune point that they can use. Once they use it, it's gone. Now, if I want to award fortune to somebody because of exceptional role playing in addition to that, then I reserve the right to do that by all means. But at least everybody has the opportunity to have fortune once per level, and that's the way I handle it. You can handle it however you want to in your game. All right, then we have social interaction. So again, social interaction is one of those things that a lot of tables just handle through role playing. And that's usually how I handle it as well. However, this kind of provides you mechanics on how you can make social conflict into a sort of combat encounter. It's a social combat encounter. In other words, the weapons that you're using are, your words, basically, and your innuendos and things like that. But it's still treated essentially like a combat encounter. You roll initiative, or you don't roll initiative. You go into initiative, and you make attacks against certain attributes of the thing that you are in social conflict with. So this whole section here kind of goes through all that. I'm really not going to go through that, simply because I don't use this rule. I don't use social conflict. I generally only use it when something is triggering a social conflict, such as a spell to charm somebody, or if you are if you have a character that is extremely comely and you're playing that up, I might consider that, but even then, I don't dig this social interaction section. I prefer to handle it in a role-playing manner. But your mileage may vary. So I would say it's here. Read through it. I'm not gonna go through it here in this video, but read through it, and if you like it, incorporate it into your game. If you don't like it, that's cool too. So anyway, that's that. So the next section goes into combat. Now, this is going to take a while to get through. So I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up here. And then part 3 of this chapter will be going over combat and all of the intricacies of a combat encounter. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video. I appreciate everybody's watching. Stay tuned for a continuation. And otherwise, hail the Demon Lord. How do I stop this damn thing?